I am no longer a member, leader, or even an elder statesman of the Gangster Disciples. I want nothing to do with it now and forever. I'm no longer the Larry Hoover people sometimes talk about, or who was written about in the papers, or the crime figure described by the government. Now, this was Larry Hoover renouncing formally any connection to the Gangster Disciples in a letter he just wrote to the very same federal judge who had denied his early release last year after federal prosecutors objected, even though several GDs considered to be just one rank under him and that had been sent to federal prison in the same Operation Headache from 1995 have been let out early under the First Step Act that was actually enacted under President Trump. Now, Hoover also wrote that he was anecdotally aware that some misguided people had used him as a symbol, adding that he wishes this were not so. Quote, regardless, these people are apart from me and do what they do with zero encouragement or direction from me. To be clear, if I had any ability to influence them, I'd ask that they'd forget me and forsake the gang life forever. He wrote that he was, quote, lost in an enduring pattern of criminality those many years ago. And during his period of criminality, he had long since renounced my association with any and all criminal organizations and their membership, that he had long since renounced, which I think is probably true. Now, Hoover's been in prison since 1973. It's 50 years this guy's been in. And, of course, I know a lot about serious crime, corruption, and American social history through my studies. And having spent some time with some older gentlemen I had befriended in Chicago, I am confident in saying, as I have said in other past videos, that Larry Hoover, whatever he might have done in the past, has definitely been being used kind of as a false flag by different parties for quite a few years now. Now, just before his last parole denial, the feds floated a story in the media without any corresponding criminal charges to go with it, that Larry Hoover had used a secret code in a letter to authorize the homicide of a high-ranking GD and assigned new people, neither of them even from Chicago, to be at the highest level of leadership in the national GD hierarchy. Of course, just recently here in LA, Kanye West and Drake did a free Hoover concert a few months back. I did a story about that. My main question was, who got the money and how did it help free Hoover? Because he still ain't free and he's having to write letters like this to the judge himself. Now, the free Hoover concert certainly gave Kanye and Drake some free advertising, as they both had albums dropping around that time. And this is what I mean by the phrase false flag that I just used. Here you have a guy who was only just recently taken off of no human contact. He's only been able to interact with other inmates for a few years now, but he supposedly runs a gang with 30,000 members. And how does a street gang even have 30,000 members across the country? What does that mean? Well, the answer to that is it's because a federal prosecutor said it in court. And then it's been repeated in newspapers and fake documentaries like Gangland and stuff on YouTube and even on the Waka Flockapedia. Now, if you read any indictment from anywhere in America with people who call themselves GDs, it almost always claims they have a tie to Chicago and that Larry Hoover is somehow connected to their activities, which I find just not to be possible. And Rick Ross said his name, and then some GDs, again, not from Chicago, who weren't even alive when Hoover went to prison. And you can click the info card above to watch that story. They extorted Rick Ross. And according to one of the members who turned state's evidence and got on the stand, he said they approached Hoover in Miami demanding $6 million for using the chairman's name, and he actually handed over $3 million. And if you notice, Rick Ross hasn't done, to my knowledge, he doesn't do much touring anymore. Now, did any of that money supposedly collected in Larry Hoover's name even reach him or his family? I wouldn't know, but it sure didn't get him out of prison. And most recently, you have a local Los Angeles social media personality using his name and inserting himself in drama around some video footage that some woman got of Hoover years ago in prison. And so his name is being used by a lot of different people to get at least themselves attention. I suppose you could say the same about me, but this is a history story and I'm trying to give some good neutral information. And I don't have a dog in the race whether Larry Hoover gets out or not. I just am concerned about, there's been so many people put in prison in the United States for so long, for so many years. We've created these subcultures of people that don't care about going to prison anymore. And Larry Hoover is an interesting example of a mythical figure at this point. He's been cut off from much connection to the real world since the mid-90s, but he is a valuable criminal brand. Just like talk about with the Supreme Team, Nipsey Hussle, the Bloods. I mean, these are these sort of ephemeral things that entertainment figures can apply to themselves to maybe as part of their marketing. Prosecutors can say they cracked down on one of these famous names as if it means they impacted crime in America. So Larry Hoover, he's been in the federal supermax Florence, the infamous one you've heard about. His fellow Chicago gang leader, organization leader Jeff Ford is there. El Chapo, people, famous terrorists, and Sammy the Bull Gravano just got out from there. Now, Larry Hoover is represented by a new lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean. Now, she's the same lawyer who represents R. Kelly, which didn't go too well, but she also helped win Bill Cosby's release from prison recently. And whatever you think about Bill Cosby, if you actually read what went on, you know, a statement was used against him, a confession to send him to prison that clearly was a part of a deal that said that statement could never be used in court. So the prosecutors did something totally inappropriate in Bill Cosby's case. That's why he got out. I'm not really a Bill Cosby defender, but in terms of legally, he should have got out and he did. Now, Hoover went to prison, like I said, 50 years ago for basically being involved in a murder associated with street-level narcotics dealing on the south side of Chicago. He got 200 years in prison because he was already infamous and being blamed, you know, maybe rightfully so for some crimes, but certainly not all the crime in Chicago, which, I mean, you know, before even Al Capone days, you know, it's a city of corruption and crime. And he was scapegoated, you know, maybe rightfully so a little bit, but so he got 200 years back in 1973, and so he spent 24 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, where he did build his fame as an organizer and a leader. But if you watch my interview with the legendary U.S. Floyd, click the info card there if you want to watch that. U.S. Floyd is the guy whose alliance with Larry Hoover back before 1970, I think 68 or 9, brought the Gangster Disciples, which had a whole big other different name because it involved different groups, to the infamous Wild 100 section of the South Side. He talks about Hoover. Well, so he ended up being in Stateville prison with Hoover when Hoover got his time in 73, 74. And U.S. Floyd talks about Hoover renouncing his GD leadership and even membership status back in the mid-70s because he was trying to get out and he thought his association with this wouldn't let him, and it didn't. And a series of events in prison pulled him back into leadership, and I can go into that into a whole other story because that's interesting and complicated, but it involves the story of the Pontiac 18, which were 18 prisoners from different gangs, pretty much all the black gangs in Chicago, and that's where the term Brothers of the Struggle was created during their long fight against the prison administration, trying to convict them of Hoover of kind of causing the prison riot and of these 18 gang members executing these 3 prison guards, but they were never convicted. So there was no one convicted of killing these 3 prison guards. And law enforcement story is that Hoover ordered the riot and then made a deal with the Illinois prison system to transfer him to more comfortable surroundings down at the Vienna prison, which was where he could operate. That's where the infamous videotapes of him walking around and having visitors, and that's where they bugged his visitor card. And gang members say that Hoover's imposition and other gang leaders' imposition of order on the Illinois prison system helped stop the RAPE of inmates, and he was one of the key figures behind the creation of the folks and people umbrellas that have defined Chicago gangland for so long. But again, that was a long time ago. He hasn't been in the state of Illinois for a quarter century, since 95. When they took him away to face federal charges in Operation Headache and him and a bunch of other GD leaders they called it running a drug ring. In May 97, he was convicted of running a drug ring that prosecutors said made $100 million a year. And except, if you really know about the case, he wasn't really running a drug ring. That's not what he was convicted of. It was more so extorting drug dealers, which isn't the same thing. But so since 97, he's been in, I guess, various supermaxes. I don't know when he got to Florence, but it's been quite a while. And like I said, for the first big chunk of the time, he was under the infamous no human contact order. Jeff Fort's in there with him, like I said. Sammy the Bull was there, the man who confessed to 17 murders and only did 5 years, then got out only to help his son flood Arizona with ecstasy and do another 18 years. And Sammy the Bull's back out yet again after all this. And Sammy's definitely still monetizing murder, this time on YouTube, because he confessed to all these things, so he can go into detail about all the people he killed on behalf of La Cosa Nostra. Meanwhile, Larry Hoover is still inside. In his letters, Hoover writes that he regrets that, quote, misguided people still hold him up as a symbol. Regardless, these people are apart from me and do what they want with zero encouragement or direction. And like I said, I'm repeating what was from the beginning, but these are strong words. To be clear, if I had any ability to influence them, I'd ask them, they forget about me and renounce gang life forever. He did acknowledge responsibility for his past criminal actions, but again, I'm no longer a member, leader, and even an elder statesman of the GDs. I want nothing to do with it now and forever. So his lawyer, Bonjean, filed an appearance on Hoover's behalf, so she went in front of the judge in Illinois District Court on July 5th. She insisted in a new motion that her client is reformed, saying that the old Larry Hoover died long ago, notwithstanding the government's unfounded claim. He harbors a desire to reclaim his title as king of the Gangster Disciples, an enterprise that bears little resemblance to the organization he built in the 70s. For the prosecutors to say that, I guess they feel like they're doing their job, but it's pretty absurd. What would, quote, reclaiming the title as the king of the Gangster Disciples even mean in 2022? Would he be telling, like, FBG, the remnants of FBG what to do? I don't know what that would mean. Prosecutors say Hoover has been a menace from behind bars. Quote, he ran a gang from prison that was responsible for the highest murder rate the city has ever seen, a drug network that was pervasive and efficient. It was an organization that controlled parks and street corners and neighborhoods and made it impossible for children to go outside and be children. It's a quote from a federal prosecutor. And it's interesting to note that right prior to the GDs and Hoover being hit with these allegations in the mid-90s, pretty much the same exact words were used against Jeff Fort and Al Rookins in the late 80s. Al Rookins were what Fort's Black Pea Stones, some of them morphed into for a time. It was that gang that was said to control the drug trade and drive the murder rate. And if you read enough newspaper headlines from different cities about stuff like I have, I read a lot of newspaper headlines from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You see the same exact phrases being used against group after group, and yet Chicago or, other cities with recurring crime problems, like where I'm from, Detroit, no matter who they put up to say is like, public enemy number one per se, nothing much ever changes. no matter who the Fed say is in power, no matter who goes away to prison. So I say, free Larry Hoover, and I'll profit American dope.